Hello everyone, how's it going? In this video, we're going to talk about Hyliion, trading under the ticker symbol HYLN. Hyliion has been once our hope in the EV market before starting its 2-year-long correction. Can the stock recover from its ashes? Can Hyliion convince the market of its relevance? And more importantly, should you buy more Hyliion shares as it is, and for how long? These are some of the questions we will try to answer in our video. Before we begin, if you'd like what I do and would want to see more analysis videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. Also, please check out the links down in the descriptions below. The book I would recommend today is called 0 to 1, co-authored by one of Palantir's main backers, Peter Thiel. If you wish to have a deeper understanding in the mindset of startup founders, this book is definitely an eye-opener. The links are affiliated, so if you use their services or purchase through them, I will get a small commission without additional cost for you. So with all that being said, let's jump into today's topic. Over the past few weeks, Hyliion seems to have touched the bottom on April 26th at $1.29. Ever since, there was a bounce back from there all the way to $1.68 on May the 5th. It is a 30% increase, and so far, it would be a decent recovery, I would say, over the last 2 years, or considering what happened over the past 2 years. Over the past 5 days, we can see that Hyliion has been trying to make it to higher levels, and the market has been able to give it incremental increases as it went up by 20% over the course of 1 week. With that being said, the market dynamic for Hyliion has remained challenging over the past years, with the demand ever draining out to new opportunities or just safer options. On paper, Hyliion should be one of the safer options in the EV sectors, as it doesn't have any scandal, irrational, and almost monolithical fundamental catalyst, and is proposing products that make sense in theory. The issue is probably the fact that its clientele is not necessarily retail but more commercial in nature, and there are some inherent inertia regarding whether they will really have a budget to modify or to replace their entire fleet. It's not necessarily just because it's environmental friendly that things might really change. The other issue lies with Hyliion's development schedule. No matter how many times the company announces its ERX and recently Harno, the market will remain heavily skeptical of actual progresses, and I'm not even sure that they will put that much weight on the announcements per se. Now, of course, this needs to be tempered with the short-term effects. Of course, for example, when Carno generator was recently announced, there has since then been a low-intensity but consistent increase in its stock price. Where can it take is a whole other issue of its own, but so far we can say with certainty that a company's specific catalysts might help. They're not sufficient. Meanwhile, the global market remains bearish overall, with the global conflicts, commodity prices, supply chains, concerns, as well as quantitative tightening affecting the capacity of Hyliion to grow and to turn a profit. One might assume that during challenging times, companies may start to wonder how to increase the efficiency of their business model. But the reality is that before they even start to tackle the fuel cost, many employers will first try to slash spendings in wages. Another thing to consider is that we are either not yet in a recession or at the very beginning of a long bearish winter. As the financial market has to deal with new paradigm of reduced liquidity and probably a lack of central bank capital injections in the foreseeable future. So for all intents and purposes, Hyliion is a company that needs constant and fairly large capital injections in order to grow. In the current market condition, the capital is not only decreasing in the absolute quantity, but also flowing to safer options in the anticipation of a major stock market correction, especially for the Nasdaq. So far, this correction hasn't happened just yet, so many participants are hesitating. I believe that Hyliion is indeed on a market of the future, and that eventually the rest of the economy will start adopting alternative energy options as well. However, I think that it's reasonable to have a certain level of skepticism or doubt on when this large-scale adoption happens. Will they necessarily go with the lithium batteries? Or if by then, new options, more, sustainable or reasonable options will also become available, by which time the technology of EV might just have become irrelevant. It's hard to think about it now, since we're still in the beginning of that trend. However, if we really think about it, EV does have a few inherent issues, namely the usage of rare earth. I mean, this is a highly polluting element to subtract from the earth, right? So this is why I'm not overly confident that just because the need for alternative energy sources increases in time, does it really mean that we're going to need more lithium batteries, right? Because if 10 years from now, let's just play some hypothetical games. If 10 years from now, Hyliion is, producing trucks and whatnot, and all of a sudden, we say that there is an alternative way to make trucks, or there is an alternative way to generate energy. I mean, what's going to really happen to Hyliion? Would they really have enough juice to do the pivot? I mean, these are the things that we need to consider while things are still in their early stages, right? Personally, I do believe that companies like Hyliion or the EV sector does have its relevance. But the question is also how much time will pass before this relevancy is reflected in their stock price, and also how much time can this relevance last, right? So these are certainly some deep questions that we need to ask ourselves, and there's obviously no absolute answers in this case. Personally, I think that EV is going to remain relevant over the next decade. Now, this is going to be a decade where real demand is probably going to be dwarfed by speculations of how much more demand there will come over the next couple of decades. And when actual larger scale adoptions will come around 2035, and the reason why I say 2035 is because due to regulatory requirements, a lot of companies or a lot of people have to buy EV cars or alternative energy cars by then. They can no longer buy combustion engine cars. So by then, yes, there will be much more people looking for alternative options from the combustion engines. So really, by then, what are the odds that we're going to have a bunch of people looking for lithium instead of other technologies, if the other technologies become available and commercially so? So these are the questions that we should ask ourselves if we plan, of course, to own shares such as Hyliion for the next 20, 30, or 50 years. That's the kind of stuff that we have to think about. Now, meanwhile, I do believe that Hyliion has its place at the current price in our portfolio. It doesn't mean that I would necessarily keep it for the next 2 decades, but if we can hold it for just the next couple of years, it's in my personal conviction that it may be worth it. And the reason why I say this is because the market is currently overselling Hyliion, or rather has been overselling Hyliion for the past 2 years. I think that personally, it did touch a bottom around $1.29 and will likely go back up from there just because the number of people who are frenetically selling Hyliion will go less. It's that simple. Of course, it might still be too early to predict with certainty whether that bottom is solid enough. Okay? It's very early in the days, but I think that it is a pivot. But if it can hold for an additional 2 weeks, then I think that we will have a much more definite answer. So my recommendation for Hyliion is to start building up a position now so that you can benefit from the relatively low stock price and to prepare for the next bullish run. The maximum exposure, I think, should remain within 1% of your portfolio.